I was in Discord when someone had posted up an article in there that stopped me dead in my tracks. And it was some recent information involving this old raggedy cunt that you see in the picture, Carolyn Bryant Donham. And this is a recent picture of her. As you can see, this heifer looks like she's about to expire any moment. But a lot of people on Twitter, and I have to agree with them, would rather she die in jail rather than out in the open, because even though we know she doesn't have long left, because the woman is 88 years old and she is like literally in failing health, and I'm gonna read it in the article, to have her just simply die with her freedom intact is an easy way out. Granted, no one will miss her. The world will be a whole lot better with her gone, but it still won't be satisfying to us as Black people knowing that she was able to live out her entire life completely unscathed for the crime in which she committed, in the role that she played in it. Now, if y'all remember, when the other recent information that came out about Carolyn Bryant Donham was that they found the warrant that was supposed to, issue like for her arrest. It wasn't a warrant that they found. And Black people mainly, went all over North Carolina looking for her because her last known location from a 2004 picture put her or placed her in North Carolina, and that was the last known picture that they had saw of her recently. Well, apparently Black people went on a wild goose chase because Carolyn Bryant is not even in North Carolina and hasn't been in North Carolina for some time now. According to the Daily Mail, and I'm going to read the article, and it's a pretty lengthy one, so y'all got to bear with me. She's been in Kentucky for these last few months. Yes, this woman is not in North Carolina. She is in Kentucky, which is in the Midwest in a whole nother time zone. She is not on the East Coast and hasn't been on the East Coast for quite some time. Remember, Emmitt Till, he lived in Chicago and he went down to Mississippi to visit family, which of course is where she's from. So people would assume that the only two locations that she would be at would be North Carolina, which was her last known location, and Mississippi, where she's from. But she's in neither of those locations. She's in Kentucky. And the article I'm going to read from was dated today as I'm recording this, August the 1st, 2022. So this picture that you're looking at her right now is recent, like very, very recent, as in taken within the last week. And these are pictures that were acquired by the Daily Mail, which is the site that I'm going to be reading from. Her accusation provoked an act of violence so unspeakable, its barbarity has resonated undiminished through the years. Unseen for close to 2 decades, Carolyn Bryant Donham has evaded curious eyes and some would say justice. Now, a DailyMail.com investigation has led us to the woman whose claims led to the brutal lynching of 14-year-old Emmitt Till in 1955. The case has been brought to the forefront once again after an unserved warrant for Donham's arrest almost 70 years ago was discovered by a team led by Till's relatives early last month. Seen in these exclusive pictures, Donham presents a stooped and frail figure to a world that has dwindled to the confines of the home she shares with her son, Thomas Bryant, age 71, and her pet Shih Tzu. Then she was a 21-year-old mother of 2, a so-called Crossroads Marilyn Monroe. Today, Donham is 88 years old, and DailyMail.com can reveal living in a small apartment community in Kentucky. Forgive me if there's some pause in them just scrolling through. Daily Mail like to post these pictures and these long captions to the pictures. And, then you got to keep on scrolling until you get to the piece that you're trying to read. She suffers from cancer. Now, here's the part where they want us to feel sympathy for. Listen, I don't think there's anybody on this planet that feels anything for her at all. She suffers from cancer, is legally blind, and is receiving end-of-life hospice care in the small shared apartment, the exact location of which DailyMail.com has chosen not to disclose. So she's still having a level of protection. We just know where she's at as far as states-wise. But now it's like, okay, what city in Kentucky is she in? Because, you know, Kentucky, I'm sure, is a pretty good sized state. I've been to Kentucky before, to Louisville, but I highly doubt she's in Louisville because Louisville is more city. And they said she's in a small town, so that could be just about anywhere. Tubes delivering oxygen loop over her ears and into her nose. She has good days and bad. She needs worse days and bad days, honestly. No good. At times, Donham appeared like a ghost, pale and peering out of her front door with cloudy eyes, still dressed in her nightgown and robe in the late afternoon. At others, she was visibly more engaged, dressed in a blue top and khaki slacks. She waited for a visit from her hospice nurse, greeting her at the door and waving her off with the little dog at her feet, in the promise of seeing her quote-unquote next week. When approached by DailyMail.com this week, her son answered the door. Donham stood only a couple feet behind him. See, here's the thing. Her son lives with her because clearly she's an old woman. She wouldn't be by herself. But also the fact is they're not going to allow her to be in a nursing home because, as you can see, black people went and stormed a couple nursing homes to see if they could find her. They ain't about to leave her by herself because they already know. Black people ain't playing. See, the worst thing that could have happened with her in this situation is them finding that unserved warrant. Excuse me. Because if it wasn't for them finding that unserved warrant in that basement, I don't think a lot of black people would have been on top of this as much. Because I think it came to the point where a lot of black people lost hope with this thing, to the point where, oh, just let her die. It got to that point, but now they have an incentive. A fire has been lit under them like a fuse to say, okay, now we have this. Now let's go get her. And it's pretty obvious they're not going to do anything because remember I did that video about that DA. I think she was a DA or the attorney general or wherever, saying that she would not prosecute her. See, the thing is not necessarily that black people don't want to get Carolyn Bryant for the crimes for what she committed. It's the fact that she has so many people protecting her. She has a whole system behind her. That's why I told people, when it comes to white people in the privilege thing, don't let them run game on you and say that it doesn't exist. This woman right here is the queen of white privilege. As a matter of fact, I think I actually might title the video that Carolyn Bryant, the queen of white privilege. Because I'm going to be honest, I don't think anybody has had much white privilege more than she has. Honestly. There might be some others, but none I can think of in modern history, like in recent history. Asked if either would speak about Till in the events that destroyed and reshaped the worlds of so many, Bryant shook his head while Donham stood by silently. Here she is, just an anonymous old lady living out her final days with her son in the apartment tranquility of a southern backwater town. She was last seen in 2004 when she was known to be living in Raleigh, North Carolina. But to many, this woman is on par with a Nazi war criminal, and the decades have done nothing to dim the horror of what passed or the anger and grief that it spawned. Till, a 14-year-old black boy from Chicago, was visiting relatives near Money, Mississippi during the summer of 1955 when he entered a rural grocery store where Donham was working on August 24th. And it's crazy that the anniversary is almost coming up. Donham, who is white, accused Till of whistling at her and grabbing her, a violation of the South's racist societal codes at the time, prompting her then husband Roy Bryant to brutally murder the boy in return. Bryant, who died in 1994, was ultimately acquitted of murder. And see, look at that. There was really no justice all the way around because the two individuals that murdered him, they got to live out the rest of their lives until they died. And it looks like the same might happen with her. So there really is no justice at all. If she dies and she's never spending at least even one day in jail, that means that all three of the people that were involved with Emmitt Till's murder, her husband, and her brother-in-law, all went to their graves practically with a smile on their face. Donham, however, managed to evade charges of or any consequences in a case that shocked the world for its brutality. Just 3 weeks ago, crowds of angry protesters descended on 3 addresses in Raleigh, North Carolina, unbeknownst to them that she wasn't even there, in which they mistakenly believed her to be living. Chanting Black Power slogans, they gathered outside of 2 residential addresses and even stormed a nursing facility, unaware that she left the town and the state some months earlier. Their actions were spurred on by the discovery of an unserved warrant for Donham's arrest. It was found by a 5-person search team led by Till's cousin Deborah Watts and her daughter Terry, along with members of the Emmitt Till Legacy Foundation. They discovered the document inside a file folder that had been stored in a box in the basement of LaFleur County Circuit Court in Greenwood, Mississippi. Donham was identified only as Mrs. Roy Bryant. Watts said that when they found the warrant, she and her daughter cried and hugged each other. Justice, she said, has to be done. Issued on August 29, 1955, the warrant was based on the sheriff's belief that Donham played a part in the kidnapping of Till, that she drove around the town of Money, Mississippi, seeking him out, and ultimately identified the terrified teen when he was brought to her on the night of Sunday, August 28th that year, dragged from his bed to be tortured and murdered by Donham's husband Roy and half-brother John Millam. A police note on the back of the warrant says that she wasn't arrested because she was not in the county, yet a local sheriff told reporters at the time that he didn't want to quote-unquote bother her since she had 2 little boys to care for. Law enforcement had not said if they planned to bother the woman who is now living out her final days in relative seclusion many miles away, but the smart money says it is unlikely despite the Till family's call for her arrest. See, this is what I'm talking about. They're not trying to go after her. They're not going to go after her. Honestly, they probably would prefer that people find her. But then again, they probably not, because of the way that they keep moving her around. But see, the thing is, she's literally on her last leg. I don't think she can do that much more moving, especially with her being in hospice care. And I always say your hospice care, that's the last go round. That's your last hurrah right there. At that point, you're in that space of you're only keeping the person comfortable, because it's just a matter of days before, they take their last breath. Instead, she lives out her days visited by caregivers, hospice nurses, and a chaplain whom DailyMail.com observed carrying a Bible as he entered Donham's home. If forgiveness is on her mind, it is never something Donham has publicly sought when it comes to her part in Till's horrific death. Trust me, it's not on her mind. Forgiveness is far from her mind. In fact, I'm sure she's been trying to forget it. But then again, maybe not. In fact, in her most recent version of the events leading up to Till's death, there have been many. Donham attempted to absolve herself of any guilt. Instead, in the memoir, dictated by her former daughter-in-law and recently leaked, Donham claims she lied in a bid to save Till and cast herself as a victim, not perpetrator of the scene. In the leaked 99-page document, I Am More Than a Wolf Whistle, obtained by the Associated Press, she wrote, I did not wish Emmitt any harm and could not stop harm from coming to him since I didn't know what was planned for him. Cap on all of that, especially since they said she was driving around looking for him, and they practically did what they did as far as torturing him near her. And I don't believe anything this chick says. Nothing. And neither should any of you listening to this, and I'm sure that y'all don't, but I'm sure there's going to be some fools out there that's going to fall for this old bitch's words. She claimed, I have always prayed that God would bless Emmitt's family, and I am truly sorry for the pain his family was caused. There's not enough apologizing in the world she can do to undo what she did. I tried to protect him by telling Roy that he's not the one, that's not him, please take him home. But bizarrely, she claimed that Till himself told the violent racist who had abducted him that he had indeed catcalled her, stepping up to take blame in a way that defied all common sense. As it was, according to Donham's early accounts, Emmitt's only offense was to wolf whistle at a white woman when he entered the grocery store that she ran with her husband, who was out of town that day. Last week, MGM Studios debuted the first trailer for their biopic Till, which will center on the character of Mamie, who will be played by Danielle Deadwyler of The Harder They Fall fame. Whoopi Goldberg will also star. In 2004, just 1 year after Mrs. Till's death, The Justice Department opened a cold case investigation into the killing to see if any more charges could be brought. After 3 years of investigation in 2007, then District Attorney Joyce Childs of Greenwood impaneled a grand jury to hear the case against Donham and what amounted to extensive evidence, including thousands of pages of documents, some uncovered by filmmaker Keith Beauchamp. The grand jury declined to bring any indictments. Keith Beauchamp claimed to have found other suspects who were still alive and eyewitnesses who stated that Donham was in the truck when Till was abducted. Speaking recently on the discovery of Donham's unserved arrest warrant, Beauchamp said that as far as he was concerned, Donham is a woman who has been evading justice for over 66 years now. The only reason she was never served with that warrant, Beauchamp said, was because of the protection of white womanhood. In 2017, the book The Blood of Emmitt Till, written by historian Timothy B. Tyson and including quotes from Donham, whom Tyson interviewed for the work, muddied the waters, still further casting doubt on Donham's courtroom testimony. In her interview with Tyson, the historian claimed she recanted much of the accounts she had given under oath, sparking Till family hopes that a day of reckoning might finally have come for Donham. The FBI investigated, but Tyson could provide no recordings, transcripts, or even notes to back up this incendiary claim. Unable to stand up to the allegations in the face of the woman's denials, investigators ultimately closed the case in 2021, leaving the surviving members of the Till family heartbroken but not surprised. Chicago teen Emmitt Till was visiting relatives in the Deep South in the face of his mother, Mamie Till's misgivings. The child of sharecroppers, Mrs. Till had grown up in the Mississippi Delta before moving to Chicago. She was uneasy when her uncle, Mose Wright, invited the boy to come and stay with him outside of the tiny Delta town of Money in August 1955. Emmitt was self-confident and a prankster who was well-built and looked far older than his 14 years. Mrs. Till worried that this would go against him in the Deep South. During Bryant and Millam's trial, much was made of Till's stature, and he was repeatedly and wrongfully referred to as a man despite his tender years. Now, when I hear that, or should I say when I read that, Tamir Rice immediately comes to mind, because Tamir Rice was 12 years old, Emmitt Till was 14. But the thing that they had in common, besides their closeness in age and both of them being black boys, is that they both compared them to that of an adult. Because remember, they tried to claim that Tamir Rice was 18. I'm like, look at this boy. He has a baby face. No one's mistaken him for 18. Now, I don't know if Tamir Rice was like what his physical appearance was. Like, was he tall for his age or whatever the case may be? But I'm going to be honest. If I looked at Emmitt, like I'm looking at Emmitt Till, and not ever for 1 second in the pictures that I've seen of him, did I ever think he was an adult. Like when they told me he was 14, I was like, okay, I believe it. Nowhere did it give me the idea that he was 14. I mean, that he was an adult. Same thing with Tamir Rice. But they always age black boys to be older than what they are, to also push this narrative that even when they're young, they have this very predatory nature about them that starts young and starts to develop when they get older. But that also goes into the propaganda of the big black boogeyman of, making boys appear to be adults and will charge them as adults if they want to. Money had one main street on which stood the Bryant's grocery store and meat market. On Wednesday, August 24th, Till and his cousins drove into Money to go to that store. Till has supposedly boasted of his success at chatting up white girls in Chicago, and one of his cousins said as a challenge there was a pretty one inside the store. What happened next has been a source of contention for close to 70 years. Witnesses said that Till broke the Mississippi Jim Crow era custom that dictated black people should leave cash on the counter by placing it directly in Donham's hand. In court, Donham testified that Till grabbed her hand and said, "How about a date, baby?" She went further and said he put his hands on her waist and told her, "You needn't be afraid of me, baby. I've been with white girls before." That just sounds so scripted in stage. Now y'all see why I'm giving her the title of the Queen of White Privilege. Donham never mentioned this physical contact in statements made before the trial, prompting many to accuse her of inventing the details to aid her husband. 4 days later, in the early hours of Sunday morning, Till's great uncle Wright was woken by Bryant and Millam banging on his door. They were armed and demanding that he take them to the nigger who did the talking. She claimed that she was afraid that she ran for a gun, but Till had already left. See how she's trying to make herself the victim? That's what she was initially trying to do. She's trying to remove herself from being an accomplice with this, and probably, the main source of this, the foundation, the launch pad, and then trying to make herself the victim. So not only is she the queen of white privilege, but she's one of the first Karens. She's the queen of Karens. Till's great uncle, Wright, told the court that when the man Frog marched the terrified teen from the house, they took him to their truck in which someone else was sitting. He recalled them asking the person if this was the boy, and they replied in a voice that was lighter than the man that it was. It has long been speculated that the voice was affirmation was Donham's. Till's body was found 3 days later by a boy out fishing in the Tallahatchie River. He found been weighed down by the 75-pound fan of a cotton gin tied around his neck with barbed wire garrote. His injuries were so gruesome, his suffering so great, that his great uncle could only identify him by a ring that he was wearing. In the aftermath of her son's death, Mrs. Till insisted that he have an open casket so that the world could see what the men driven by violent racial hatred had done to her son. She rejected the undertaker's advice to have a closed casket or his offer to touch up Till's appearance, saying, "Let the people see what I've seen." Everybody needed to know what happened to Emmitt Till. In the end, 50,000 people filed past his casket at a church in Chicago's South Side. It took all the white male jury just 40 minutes to return a verdict of not guilty in Bryant and Millam's trial. The quote-unquote victory was celebrated with gunshots around the courthouse, and Donham and Bryant kissed passionately for the cameras. It doesn't sound like a woman that was too worried about them getting the wrong boy. And based on some pictures that I've seen of her with her husband and them, hugged up and everything with smiles, and then you think of the stories that she's given right here. Come on now. Let's be real here. 4 months later, Bryant and Millam gave an interview to Look magazine in which they spoke of their guilt. Safe in the knowledge that they cannot be retried under the double jeopardy rule, they were paid $4,000, roughly $36,000 by today's standards. So look at that. They basically gloated about what they did because they knew that they knew they wouldn't be retried, basically double jeopardy. They knew they couldn't be retried, so they're gloating about what they did. The jury knew that they were guilty. Those people in that room knew that they were guilty. They knew they were guilty. But because they were white in the South during that time, they knew they would be found not guilty. And they said it took them 40 minutes. That had to be one of the quickest verdicts ever. But they were paid for their time to get interviewed and gloated about what they did because they knew they would not be able to go back and try them again and then switch the verdict around saying that they were guilty. I mean, let's be real here. At that time, white people being on trial for the murder of or the lynching of a black person, no matter the gender or the age, they wasn't about to be found guilty. And when you think about it, that kind of still plays out today. You still have some that will slip through the cracks, but it's more found not guilty than there are found guilty. And a lot of times, even if they are found guilty, they get hit with slaps on the wrist. Mrs. Till, who died in 2003, became an activist and spoke of her son as the sacrificial lamb of the civil rights movement, for which contributions soared in the aftermath of his death. And I believe that is the end of the article. Wow, that was a lot to unpack. I think one thing that I did learn with this one is I didn't know that they got paid when they did that interview after they were found not guilty. I didn't know that. So that was very interesting, but not surprising. But I know many of you who are listening to this right now are probably fuming at just what I was reading right there. Because honestly, I wasn't planning on reading those parts right there past a certain part. But I said, you know what? I'm already in the groove of things. Let me go ahead and do it. But point blank period, black people want this heifer in jail. And then she can croak there. But for her to simply just croak on the outside, that there's really no justice with that. I mean, like I said, granted, the world will be a lot better when she's gone finally. But it's the principle of the matter that she's literally dying a free woman. Free as far as not just only being not locked up, but free of prosecution. free of doing the time that she was supposed to do. I mean, think about it. Her brother-in-law and her husband both lived out the rest of their lives outside. They gloated about killing this boy because they knew they couldn't be tried again, and got paid for their services, basically, and died free men. And from the looks of it, the Trinity is about to be complete. If they don't lock her up, if they don't put her in cuffs, and they don't throw her in jail, she's going to get the same treatment. So granted, she'll be gone from this world. I mean, you know, thank God for that when that time does come. But the principle again of the matter is she's going to die a free woman that should not be free. And where's the justice in that? Considering that she should have been locked up, but this system that we live in continues to protect her and people like her. That's why I said that Carolyn Bryant Donham is the queen of white privilege, white womanhood, and Karenhood. Like, she literally has a trinity within herself. And honestly, she really set the tone for a lot of these women out here that we call Karens today. She really set the tone for that. Like, she's literally their foundation. She is the Karen launch pad. But I'm going to go ahead and conclude the video right here. If you are new, please go ahead to like, comment, and share. Subscribe to the channel. Make sure you have your bell clicked to have your notifications set to all on here, as well as your mobile devices. All other links will be down in the description.